Some ideas spread quietly. Others spark outrage from the minute they appear on the internet. And then there are ideas like this one. Radqueer, a term that has been around for a while, but one that you might not fully understand. Depending on who you ask, people will say that it's either a place where you will be accepted, or a dangerous ideology that is blindly followed by people who don't know better. But where did it come from? What is it actually about? And how did it go from being an obscure social media trend to being the genuine community that it has become? Because nowadays, it's becoming impossible to ignore. But to understand what Radqueer really is, we have to start from the beginning. The term Radqueer was first created by a Tumblr user in 2021, and their reason for creating it was because they saw the LGBTQ+ community as being unaccepting of paraphilias and trans identities. But since 2022, there have been two types of Radqueer, old and new. Old Radqueer supports the idea that paraphilias fall under the queer sexuality bracket, while new Radqueer doesn't see them as sexualities but still supports them. This isn't wildly different, so you might be wondering why exactly they're split into two parts, and let me tell you, there's a reason for that. You see, people in the community follow two sides, anti-contact or pro-contact. They can also fall somewhere in the middle, but we'll get into that. This applies to the paraphilias aspect, and the reason new Radqueer was created was because the creator of old Radqueer revealed that they actually supported pro-C. Contact stances are used to communicate thoughts on interactions between paraphiles and their subjects. So if you are pro-contact, then that means that you think it's okay for, let's say, someone who is attracted to kids to have or romantic interactions with a child. Being anti-contact means that you are against this, and most anti-C Radqueers believe that rather than indulging in your attractions, you should seek therapy for them. There are also people who don't lean fully to one side or the other and are sitting somewhere in the middle, but that's on a person-by-person basis. There are some additional terms that you can use if you feel like this, such as restricted contact and also neutral contact, but it is really just depending on what the individual actually thinks if there is a stance that falls under it. I've spoken to a lot of people during my research and know there are vocal majorities. I found that things certainly aren't the same with every person. You can't really define the entire community as being pro-C or anti-C, because that simply isn't the case. Outside of accepting paraphiles, there is a large section of the community who identify using trans identities, and these are a core part of Radqueer ideology. Trans ID basically refers to any trans label that isn't transgender. Some of these are harmless and don't really affect others, but you'll find some disturbing labels mixed in with the rest. During my research, I found out that a lot of individuals actually identified with terms like trans or trans groomer, and the general thought from a lot of Radqueers in the community is that if it doesn't affect them, then it's none of their business. And terms like these fall under a category known as trans harmful. This covers all trans IDs that are deliberately harmful in nature, and some other examples are things like trans kidnapper and trans Nazi. Another category is transabled or trans disabled. This refers to identities where someone claims to transition into having a certain disability. Some examples of this is trans autistic, trans blind, or trans Tourette's. This term was originally used well before the Radqueer community to refer to people who had amputated their limbs in an attempt to alleviate gender dysphoria. However, it has now been adopted by the Radqueers into what we see today. And another big one is trans race. This is one you may have heard of as it's been well discussed over the years, and it refers to people who claim to transition into certain races. One Radqueer I spoke to actually identifies as being trans race. Finally, being trans age means that you transition into being a different age than what you actually are. This is why in Radqueer communities, they usually refer to your actual age as your bodily age, as some people choose to identify as older or younger than they actually are. This is not to be confused with things like age regression either, because although age regressors do regress to a childlike state of mind, and often as a coping mechanism because of mental health or past trauma, people who are trans age genuinely believe that they can transition into being the age that they want to be. There are a lot of other categories, but these are the main ones that I came across during my research. Another important thing to note in this discussion is the existence of an ideology known as xenosatanism. Although this started as something that was unaccepted by a lot of radqueers, it has slowly but surely been on the rise, with many private Discord servers having members who actually believe in these beliefs. So what are the beliefs? To give you an idea, they are extremely pro-trans ID, including things like transabled, trans age, and trans species. They also believe in rights for pedophiles, zoophiles, and necrophiles, and these three paraphilias are referred to by the radqueer community as being the big three. Another big belief is that society should abolish the age of consent, and completely legalize both real and fictional CSAM. They also believe in the legalization of sex work worldwide, and they believe that minors should be able to engage in this. There are many other beliefs of xenosatanists, but these are some of the main ones. So as you'll now understand, radqueer is bigger than just one belief. So many different ideologies, labels, and goals all fall under it. But I wanted to understand, and not just from the outside. So I stepped into their spaces, I joined their servers, and I spoke to their people. I didn't know what to expect, I just knew that I had questions. And luckily for me, there were people ready to answer them. During this section of the video, you may hear a lot of terms that aren't really going to make much sense, so I'm going to do my best to explain some of them to you. We touched a bit on trans IDs in the last section, but I feel it's important to touch on some of the ones that are brought up. These are also ones that I've seen around when I was looking into these spaces. Trans IDs basically cover any identity that isn't transgender. Some of these are harmless, like trans species. You really aren't hurting anyone by identifying as a dog or whatever, whether you agree with that or not. But there are other, far more concerning ones that caught my eye. Take trans raped, for example. It is a term that falls under the trans sexually assault bracket, and it is for those who feel like they should have been raped. The general umbrella basically means that the person feels that they should have been assaulted in any way sexually, and there are many different variants, such as permasexual abuse, which means that the person thinks that they should have been permanently sexually abused. There are also terms that fall under the trans harmful bracket, which is for anyone who has views or a lifestyle that carries inherent harm. One of these terms I noticed was trans-Nazi, which is a term for those who believe they should have been a Nazi in some way. It caused a lot of debate during the time that it was originally thought up in the radqueer community, because some people viewed it as far too harmful, and trans-harmful was basically coined as a result, giving them a more general bracket. However, there are many other terms that came way before this one, such as trans criminal and trans murderer. Another term brought up a lot is trans race or transracial, sometimes shortened to trace. This is a term for people who believe they are or should have been a different race than the one they actually are. A lot of people argue against this by saying that it's racist, but people try to argue the antis by saying that it's not actually racist, just appreciative of other races and being your true self. Some people may also refer to the age they actually are as being their bodily age, because they believe that they are not actually that age but either younger or older. Some people have come forward to tell me their stories off camera about how they were groomed by people using trans age as an excuse. So although some people may see this one as being quite unharmful, it can actually be extremely abused, and it certainly has its dark side.
The way I define Radqueer is basically, it's like, you're supportive of all paraphilias and these things called transidentities. You're supportive of, like, any contradictory labels, any sexualities. It's kind of like radinclus, but like more inclusive of things that people aren't normally willing to accept.
And if I may ask, just to clarify before some later questions, would you say that you're pro-contact or no contact?
I am pro contact, however, I am not practicing. I can't exactly remember when I first joined the Radqueer community, but I used to be in like a bunch of zoophile communities originally. I used to be like very dogmatic towards other paraphilias, but around 1 year ago, I figured out about the Radqueer community and I joined some websites that are supporting and accepting of Radqueers, and I made some friends there. So I decided to start identifying as Radqueer myself, and I myself started using transidentities and discovering my other paraphilias. You can identify as whatever you want. However, some Radqueer people have pro contacts and certain trans identities in their DNI, so I'm not really sure if they view those identities as valid, but usually they're inclusive of all identities.
There's obviously a lot of information out there about the community. If you could say one thing to someone who doesn't know anything about it, or may have heard some misconceptions, what would it be?
The Radqueer community is usually not supportive of abuse in any way.
There are a lot of trans IDs and stuff like that within the Radqueer communities, and there's some that some people might disagree with. How do you think that people should treat the identities that they don't necessarily agree with, or ones that they judge from an outside perspective?
Well, even if I personally don't understand an identity or someone else doesn't understand it, I still think that you should treat it with love and respect as long as no one is promoting harm or there's no or if there's no harm involved.
You have a Discord server for Radqueer people. When did you start this server, and why did you decide to start one?
Well, originally I had like a bunch of Radqueer servers in like around November of 2024. They were originally called Atypical, but due to like people attempting to post and solicit illegal material there, I had to abandon the servers. And this server is technically not new. There was a server before it, but also because antis found that server, I had to abandon it. But I think I found that server in like March of 2025, the newest one. Yeah. But uh, I started I started it because there was like a lack of Radcare spaces for like pro C people, so yeah.
Do you think that any of the criticism of the Radqueer community is valid, or do you disagree with it all?
Mostly it's just criticism from people who are not accepting of paraphilias or trans identities, with some trans identities still stirring up discourse to this day. But I do agree with some criticisms that some parts of the Radqueer community is like overlooking non-consensual grooming and abuse. Like the other day I saw someone who was quote unquote neutral on abuse, so there's that.
You said that you had to abandon some of your servers because people were trying to elicit illegal material. Is that something that's looked down on within the Radqueer community, or is that just simply because of Discord's TOS?
Simply because of Discord's TOS. It was originally made to be a safe space for people with paraphilias, but I never mentioned that the first original servers were Radqueer, unfortunately, so that attracted some people who like wanted to solicit illegal material from others.
Are there any parts of the Radqueer community that you personally disagree with?
Well, there's these people called like base queers and LSD queers. They're both pro-rape identities. They also support the distribution of child pornography. I just don't like any identities that support abuse, but I think that's pretty basic, so yeah.
So do you disagree with like identities like trans rapists and stuff like that as well then?
No, they're just trans identities. I don't find
What
anything
could you explain a
wrong.
bit about what that actually is? Just because I'm obvious, like I'm not too clued up on what exactly like trans IDs mean, if you get what I mean. So could you just explain that a little to me, if that's all right?
Okay, so basically trans identities are basically like transgenders, so like they just I trans identify as something that they want to be or feel like they were meant to be. Like a trans species person may present themselves as, for example, a dog, or say that they want to be a dog. I've already seen some child groomers in the community, including someone who like tried to make a minor self-harm and stuff. So yeah, that's like a problem in the Radqueer community that I'm not going to overlook.
Is it something that you come across quite regularly?
I don't really see a lot of abusers in the Radqueer community, but when I do, I take note of it. But yes, I do still worry about it.
So, what would your message be to people who think that the Radqueer community is dangerous?
Most of the Radqueer community is anti-abuse, and trans identities are just a fun way to express yourself. We're basically radically inclusive people, and most Radqueers don't support stuff that involves harm. As long as no one's being harmed, then it's all okay in our eyes.
So a lot of people from the outside would associate the Radqueer community with grooming and other disturbing activity, but you've kind of made it clear that that's not really the reality. But do you think this holds any truth, or is it just misrepresented?
The entire Radqueer community would be misrepresented if somebody based the Radqueer community off of grooming, but a small portion does happen to support grooming. So, like 75%, it's not an actual issue, and you shouldn't base all Radqueers off of that.
What do you think of things like xenosatanism and values like abolishing the age of consent?
I do support the idea of abolishing the age of consent, but on xenosatanism, there's like one principle that I think establishes that there's quote unquote non-harmful rape, which I absolutely do not support.
Why would someone, see if people aren't supportive of things like rape and stuff like that, why would someone choose to identify as like a trans rapist in terms of trans ID?
Well, let's say, for example, they're like a biastophile, somebody who has an attraction to rape. They may like have intrusive thoughts about wanting to rape someone or having attractions to the idea of raping people, so there's that.
With all of the information that you have and obviously the insider perspective, do you think that anything about the community needs to change, or are you happy with where the Radqueer community is at?
For the most part, I'm happy with how the Radqueer community is going right now. I just don't like people who emphasize with like rapists or abusers or whatever. That's the only part that I dislike. So, yeah.
So, what do we take from that? Let's recap. They define the Radqueer community as being accepting of trans identities and paraphilias that the general public may not. They say that when they first joined the community, they went on websites that were supportive of the community. This kind of highlights just how easily someone can fall down this rabbit hole. Because trust me, there are many websites out there, even more than I could count on two hands. They say that most of the community is anti-abuse. And although I have found that to be the case in a lot of the servers that I have been in, a lot still promote harmful identities such as trans rapist or trans groomer. They argue that it's okay because this is a feeling rather than acting on it. But surely there has to be somewhere where we draw a line when it comes to this. They also say that they agree with the idea of abolishing the age of consent, which is quite a big thing when it comes to these communities. Some people believe that societal change is needed in that regard, and some people could feel more valid if that were the case. But there are many arguments against this, and it is mostly viewed as harmful by a large portion of the community. They often use the description non-consensual grooming, as do a lot of Radqueers, and this could be quite a harmful thing to say. Sadly, many children are groomed every day, especially by predators online. So to be building a community where there is such a thing that an adult can talk to a minor consensually to then basically build a relationship with them, that's concerning. Especially when you consider that the definition is manipulative behaviours used by groomers to gain access to victims in order to coerce them into agreeing to abuse. It is incredibly disturbing that this could ever be viewed as consensual. When I asked them to elaborate more on why they had to take down their servers for people posting illegal content, they responded by saying that it was simply because of the platform's TOS. This implies that they don't actually find it concerning to send this type of material, and sadly, that is a mindset that we see far too often in these communities. But the other person I interviewed did have some different opinions.
I would personally define it as being somebody who's just accepting of anybody that has a, well, it used to be called a good faith identity, which is pretty much something that doesn't harm anybody. So that's kind of the basis of what we do.
Would you say that you are for pro-contact or more for non-contact?
I'm very, back in the day, pro-contact just used to be like, oh, you can have a friend, or like a person who is a zoophile or whatever, they can have a pet dog. But nowadays people take it to more like pro-sexual contact, which I'm 100% against, and most Radqueers are. Obviously we follow the law, so yeah.
So when did you first come across the community and why did it resonate with you?
Probably like 3 years ago. I was introduced by a partner, and at first I thought it was like weird. I judged it a lot, but then I like looked into it and I realized, wow, like trans ID things would genuinely help my mental health so much, like equally as much as being transgender has made for me.
So do you identify with a lot of trans IDs then?
Yeah, a few. I identify as trace or biracial, or some may call it transracial.
Who decides what's valid in these communities? Like, is there like a group of people or a person who decides like new identities or stuff like that? Or is it really truly limitless in the sense of you can identify as whatever you want?
Yeah, you can identify as whatever you want. It's, some people see it as like a fun thing or a serious thing. You can put trans in front of anything and that's pretty much it. But collectively, we don't decide anything. It's just like, it's like our community decides laws, I guess. We make sure that people feel fine about their identities and stuff. And obviously we don't want to harm people. That's like the last thing we want to do. We just don't want people to feel ostracized. Like, it's pretty much similar to how like the queer community started. We just hate people being hated on and bullied or whatnot. I know that's stupid, like a lot of people online is like, oh, I'm bullied, trolls or whatnot, but it kind of is like that. Like, it's genuinely hard to deal with, and it could lead to people committing suicide, and we just don't want that.
So do you think that spaces like the Radqueer community are important for, improving people's mental health?
Oh yeah. We are very, like, there's obviously people who like aren't very pro like mental health, which I don't really agree with that. It's more in the mindset of like mental health and capitalism and stuff like that. Like, it's hard to get, mental health resources in this world. But in general, I do think mental health is a good thing, and I do think that Radqueer communities help mental health in general.
So I've spoken to some people who are not fond of the community, and outside views from what I've gathered is that a lot of people feel as though people in the Radqueer community are almost taking advantage of people who may suffer from low mental health. What is your kind of response to that as someone who's in the community and someone who thinks it has a positive impact on mental health?
Yeah, I could see how some people could see that in general. Anybody could do that to anybody, like, no matter if it's in the Radqueer community or if it's outside of it. And that's could be like, grooming or whatever, things like that. But I genuinely do not think that a place where you could be yourself would harm anybody.
There's a lot of trans IDs and stuff like that within the Radqueer community, and some of those people might disagree with. How do you think people should treat the identities that they don't agree with, or ones that they judge from an outsider perspective?
I think as long as you don't harass the person or like go around and being like, oh my god, this is stupid, going to people and being like, look at this, ha ha ha. Like, I think the best thing you could do is genuinely ignore it.
What do you think of identities like trans rapist or trans groomer or stuff like that?
Most of the time these people aren't acting on it. Probably like 90% of trans IDs come from trauma. So this could be like, I'm using myself as an example. Me being transgender, I know a lot of people are like, no, it's not from trauma. And no, it's not from trauma. But for me specifically, I do think me being transgender did come from trauma. especially me being born a female and being experienced misogyny. I think it's very similar for all trans IDs, including transgender, could be formed from trauma. But I do not think these people are acting on it, and if they are, it would be consensual.
So yeah, and you run a Discord server for Radqueer people. When did you start your server, and what made you want to start one?
So I started one because of similar reasons that new people coming in have. Like, they like look at certain groups and they're like, oh, this is really wrong. Like, I joined some servers that were like not the greatest people were in it. They were very unsafe for new members. That's why I call it. We try not to trigger people. We try not to harm anybody. But these other servers I were joining, they weren't the best. Like, they had very not great stuff in it. But it was a lot of people who had very bad mental health issues and were just, kind of using the server as like a really not great spot.
So have you ever run into any problems of people maybe trying to bring that stuff into your server, or are you quite good at keeping that stuff out?
With any Discord server, there's going to be people who are like going to come in and like spam shit, but most of the time the people who like spam this horrible shit are antis, what we call antis, which is like anti-Radqueer. But we've never had an instance where like a person who identifies as Radqueer says like crazy shit. And if maybe like there's 3 instances and we would just ban them.
Like we've touched on, there's a lot of criticism of the Radqueer community. Do you see any of it as being valid, or do you disagree with it all?
I see it as valid, yeah, because obviously it's very concerning that there are like, rapists in this world and shit. And one of the main things being paraphilias in the Radqueer community. A paraphilia is a thought. It's like what people say thought crimes, And you can express that, but you shouldn't act on it,
So are there any part of the Radqueer community that you would kind of highlight as ones that you personally disagree with?
Just kind of what I just said. I mean, like, majority of Radqueers, we do non-harmful stuff because we like the benefit. We like to benefit people the most out of whatever. Like, we want them to feel great and stuff. We don't want them to get harmed.
Did you say you were pro contact or no contact?
I don't really have a contact stance because it's just like, it's too talked about in the community. It's just like, it's such a main focus, and I think we're really like driving off of the main cause of what we are. It's very obvious that the laws that are in place, and I'm just using the US as an example, they limit the harm of people like minors and animals and things like that, and that is great. But like, obviously that's in the law. So we can't really like change the law, and we shouldn't change the law because what's in set is good. Like what we have in the Radqueer community it's just expression. I don't think I've ran into any problems like this happening where there was like an adult trying to act upon a minor. But if it were to happen, that's obviously one thing illegal, and we can't, like, we just ban them. I mean, we can't really prevent these types of things,
A lot of the people from the outside associate the Radqueer community with things like grooming and other disturbing activities. Do you think that this holds any truth, or is it simply because the community is misrepresented to the general public?
I could see that being a case. I mean, a lot of the Radqueer community does cater to people who like have mental disabilities and things like that, or have experienced trauma. So obviously someone who has experienced trauma, let's say they were groomed as a child, they might do that when they grow up. And we don't offer a safe space for them to do that, but we offer a safe space for them to talk about their feelings and hopefully drive them in the right direction to not doing that. But we are not therapists, and most people cannot get therapists. That is really expensive, but we try to offer the best we can without making people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, so do you think that the Radqueer community could actually be seen as quite important in terms of being a place where people can come and openly talk about their feelings in regards to stuff like this?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a lot of what we do. We talk about our transids, we talk about our paraphilias.
So, what would be your message to people who think the Radqueer community is dangerous?
I would just try to talk to a person that can actually have a conversation about it. Like, there's a lot of people who try to talk about it Radqueer and then they just start screaming. That's never gonna solve anything. But generally, just have a conversation with a Radqueer person, and then like ask them how they feel and why they do what they do, and they'll explain it to you, and you'll be like, oh well, this makes sense.
There's obviously other areas to it, like Xeno-Satanism and stuff like that. What do you think
Yeah.
of that and values like abolishing the age of consent?
I do not agree to abolish the age of consent. It is there for a reason, especially as me, a person who was, sexually assaulted throughout my life by an adult. It's not like it's there for a reason. I just like to add another thing because I'm more focused on transits than paraphilias or things like that. So I don't have many paraphilias. I'm not a mapper zoo or anything, so I'm not the best person to ask about those things. But there's other people in the server that you join that does have these things. But in the mind of transit, like specifically for trace and transabled things, which we identify as both. For trace, it's like I genuinely do not think it is racist, and I've met so many trace people that are in my server who are like bodily black or bodily like of color who are transitioning to other races, either it be a white or not. And it's I get the same euphoria as being trace that with I do being transgender.
Obviously, there are a lot of people who may think that, being trace is racist. So, what's kind of your argument against that?
I don't see it as being racist because I see it as being open towards all races and communities. I see it as being like, and people are like, well, if you're just interested, you could just be interested in the culture. And I think it's a lot more than that. It's a lot more, it's just like, you've always felt this way. And it's the same argument as people back then who were like, a man is transitioning into a woman. Oh, you want to be oppressed. You want to be oppressed because you want to transition into a woman. So I think it's very similar as transitioning into a certain race. Especially if you're transitioning into a race that could be seen as a minority.
First of all, how would you personally define being radqueer?
I guess I wouldn't really consider I would consider myself a radqueer, but at the same time it's kind of iffy. I mean, especially due to the fact that there's plenty of paraphilias I do not support, but at the same time I'm just mostly anti-harassment. Like I'm not the biggest fan of pedophilia. Like I don't mind it since I've been through a few horrible relationships in the past that might have included that. It's kind of awkward for me, honestly.
Is it kind of difficult being in a community where paraphilias like that are openly spoken about as someone who may not fully agree with it?
Sometimes. It really doesn't matter to me. Like I said, I don't care what you do as long as no one's getting like seriously hurt or like you're about to just like completely kill someone, you know?
When did you first come across the radqueer community and why did it resonate with you?
I had already been a pro shipper for a while since I was like 11, I want to say. So I guess I started getting a little more into that and finding out what oh my god, I can't talk. Radqueer. Finding out what that was kind of like interesting because I'm like, oh well, I guess that seems okay. It seemed okay at the time because when I first found out about it, I didn't really know exactly what it was, and my main definition of it was just straight, oh, anti-harassment, you know? But I figured it out more, and it still ended up resonating with me. I think the reason is because, like I said, I've gone through things, and I just ended up constantly putting myself back in those situations, you know? So it was kind of like, oh, I guess that's what I am, since I was fine with talking to people like that.
So you mentioned there that you were a pro shipper beforehand. Could you explain a bit about what that means for people who maybe don't know what pro shipping is?
It's basically just, again, anti-harassment. There's a difference between pro shipping and com shipping, or dark shipping, whatever people know as these terms. It's basically just ship whatever you want, whether it's, real people, which isn't my thing personally, or fictional characters. So, it's like when you ship someone for like a toxic relationship, in my opinion. Like a few different ways. Like take yaoi for example. Like people always talk about toxic yaoi, and they don't understand that that's also part of like pro shipping because you're actively supporting and looking into abusive material.
In these Radqueer communities, who kind of decides what's valid, and or is it kind of truly limitless in the sense that you can identify as whatever you want?
As for everyone that I've met so far, no one is transracial. I know about that. I have met a few like trans disability folks, and I've met a couple of other type of identities. I think it's really just as long as you're not actively hurting anyone, that no one is going to sit there and ridicule you for being who you are.
So in terms of like people being pro contact and no contact, where would you say you stand on that?
I'm definitely like somewhere in the middle. It just depends on your paraphilia. Like objectum, I'm personally an objectum, which is just like the sexual or romantic attraction towards an inanimate object. That's obviously pro contact because it's not like it can tell you anything, or it's not like it has feelings. Yeah, zoophilia, necrophilia, and stuff like that. Yeah, I do understand that those are big. Those are quite. We call those the big three, as far as I'm aware. And I'm mostly no contact with them, depending on how intense it is. Like, say, oh god, how do I even describe it? I was literally having a conversation in the server earlier with someone, like, could someone just buy, like, a taxidermy animal for, like, take a zoo necro, for example? They could just buy a taxidermy animal for, whatever purposes they want.
There's obviously a lot of information out there about the Radqueer community, and some of it might be misinformation. So, if you could say one thing to someone who doesn't have any idea about what the Radqueer community is, or someone who has a completely wrong idea about it in your opinion, what would you say to that person?
All of us are pedophiles, and definitely not all of us like touching people without consent. Like, it's most of us, yes, we are really interesting, but we're not completely bad people, and we're not just gonna sit there and defend, like genuine criminals, like rapists or murderers. That's one of the bigger.
Another big aspect of the Radqueer community that I've found is trans IDs. Some of these transids people might disagree with. How do you think people should treat the identities that they don't necessarily agree with, or ones that they judge without really knowing what it's like?
I can understand, like not liking people who are transracial or trans disabilities, stuff like that. See, that's really obviously and like easily one of like the more ridiculed ones. And I think that it's just really not your business at the same time. Like, yeah, they might be a little weird. You can judge, but you can't just like straight up harass them and like insult them just for something that they want to do.
In terms of people identifying as like trans rapists and trans groomers, what are your opinions on people who identify with those transids?
Well, I would say that they're just what they say they are. I wouldn't really call it a trans ID or anything like that. Because mostly, like, if you call yourself a groomer or a rapist, I mean, most likely you are one, even if you mean it as like a joke, like with like the identity part. But I've met a few of them, and they're just straight up what they say they're like they are.
So you're in a Discord server for Radqueer people. Do you think that having that community around you is important?
No, it's not that important. I joined because I lost one of my older servers, which weren't really Radqueer. This is honestly the time where I figured out what Radqueer was at the first minute when I first joined the server, which is about 2 months ago, I think. And so I wouldn't say they're that important, but the people that are in it have made me feel definitely more welcomed. Even though, as a pro shipper, it's kind of easy to find people who will accept you. But even then.
Do you think that any of the criticism of the Radqueer community is valid, or would you say you disagree with it all?
No, I would definitely say some of it's valid. Well, most of it, really. Like, yeah, no one in society really wants a rapist or a pedophile going around and, doing things that aren't necessarily good, you know? So I do think that most of the criticism towards the community is definitely needed and valid all at the same time because I personally, I don't know about anyone else on the server, if you've talked to them, we, don't really like, I guess I'm not pro contact, but I don't know how to explain it. I'm sorry. I can't talk today.
Would you say you disagree with the part of the Radqueer community that maybe identify as, pedophiles and stuff like that, or again, is it just kind of a case of you just accept it because it's not really your business?
Yeah, it's really just that. Like, okay, do whatever you want, don't kill anyone.
So is there ever a worry to you that actual child predators might use the community and use the labels to prey on vulnerable children?
Oh yeah, no, big time. It's already happened in the server multiple times, actually. One of my old friends, he was about 11. He left the server a little while ago, but multiple adults had reached out to him after finding out his age. And so it's already obvious that they probably do abuse it in that way. So it's really no fighting it, especially since when you're a Radqueer, you're automatically like agreeing, like, okay, well, I'm not gonna really say anything bad about this paraphilia or them next.
But do you think that there's also an argument to be made that if experiences like that are happening, then you should speak out against it, or are you still kind of believing in your, it's none of your business, like, for example?
It really just depends if the person or the victim, I'll say, it really just depends if they're being genuinely hurt. Like, there is someone in the server who is a minor and they're dating an adult. I talked to them a little bit about their relationship, and they said that they were completely fine with, dating an adult. So I think it just depends if the quote unquote victim is uncomfortable or comfortable with said relationship.
A lot of people would look at that and, associate the Radqueer community with things like grooming and other stuff like that. Do you think that that holds some truth to it?
Oh, definitely, because there's a lot of, minors in our community, probably more than there are adults, honestly. And so it definitely leaves room for, like, well, I'm not really going to say anything because it's obvious that you are a map, aka minor type of person. So they're not going to say anything most likely, which will just lead them into probably not so good space.
In your genuine opinion, do you think that the Radqueer community is even slightly dangerous?
Oh yeah, no, big time. It's probably one of the most dangerous ones out there. I'm gonna say that, like, in so much seriousness, because there's so many ways for people to, like, get groomed, quote unquote, or, hurt in general.
Yeah, and I've spoken to a lot of people who are staunchly against this community, and they've said that they kind of see it as people in the Radqueer community maybe taking advantage of vulnerable young people. Do you see that as having any truth, or do you think that the Radqueer community is helpful for people's mental health?
It really just depends, honestly. Yes, I do believe that adults will take advantage of a Radqueer minor or vice versa, honestly, sometimes. It's not common, but it does. It's a very harmful place, depending on the people you hang around with. Like, if say you're in, like, a minors only Radqueer community, I would say that that's more safe than one that's, like, separate, that's not, oh my god, sorry. That's, like, with adults.
Another aspect of this is obviously xenosatanism and values like abolishing the age of consent. Is that something that you personally align with, and do you think that abolishing the age of consent is a good idea, or do you disagree with that?
I actually do disagree with it because, as a minor myself, I don't think the age of consent should be anything under at least 17, mostly because a lot of teenagers or minors aren't completely developed enough until they're even 20, like 21 or 25. So they're already, like, they probably understand what it is, but they don't understand what they're getting themselves into when it comes to consent, especially those under 16.
With all of the information that you have and the inside perspective that you have, do you think that anything about the Radqueer community needs to change, or would you say that you're happy with the way things are?
I wouldn't say I'm exactly happy, but I also wouldn't say that there are things that need to change. We're called Radqueers for a reason, and the definition that's usually used when describing us is definitely true. So there's really no reason of trying to change anything that's already been proven to be true.
Yeah. What would that definition be? What do people like mainly use to describe you guys?
I guess it's really just the fact that they only see the big three, zoophilia, necrophilia, and pedophilia. They only see those three, when they're not wrong. Those are the ones that we do support mostly, depending on the servers you go to. This isn't the only Radqueer server out there, I'm sure. So we definitely all have a different opinion on it. But I just think that it's it's interesting, I'll say that.
So, this is how the Radqueer community defines itself. Paraphilia acceptance, transidentities that you may have never believed existed, and private, hidden servers. They have a bubble where this is fine in the eyes of their peers, but outside of that community, the reaction is very different. For many, this community isn't seen as a safe place. Instead, it's seen as dangerous. There is an argument to be made that with acceptance as radical and limitless as this, you're actually just enabling harmful and disturbing behaviour under the cover of identity. So I also wanted to hear about the people speaking out. Those who are raising the alarm on what they believe to be a disturbing internet community.
Oh, around a while ago, maybe when I was like 12 or 11, I stumbled onto this one creator's webcomic online. I think I found it originally through like animation memes, if you remember what that is. It's like I found out about their content through that, and I was just so awestruck by it because it really appealed to me. It had like representation of like LGBT characters and disabled characters. I hadn't seen things for like that like appealed to me in such like a way. I'm sorry, I'm not describing it well, but it was it was so cool to me. And this author had like a really tight knit community. They were often like conversing with their fans, and I made a few pieces of fan art for them, and they even like responded to it, and it was really cool to see. I've been following it for like the past couple of years, and I really like seeing where it's gone. I think it had around like 4 chapters of it when I stopped. But it was really obvious from the beginning that the person making it was really like mentally unwell. I'm pretty sure they started when they were like a teenager, and it like as within like the past 2 years, I really noticed like a sudden drop in quality. And then you check like the author's blog, and they're like obviously in mental distress. It was really upsetting to see. They apparently got like a lot of harassment for making their comic, and that's just miserable to me. But a while ago, I one day I just logged on my computer and I go to the website, and it's completely gone. Like everything is gone, and I'm like, what happened here? And then I go onto the author's blog, and it's kind of a nightmare. To give context to this, the author had like a spin-off of their main comic, a like side comic where all the characters were like happy and in a nice like family unit. They were all together, and it was super cute. It was meant for the author's personal comfort, and I thought that was really like I hadn't really seen anything like that before, and I think that was awesome for them. So I supported them through that, and I thought that it was just like this nice, sweet thing that they wanted to make for themselves to make themselves happy. And I guess in one way it was, but I go into like the general people like talking about the comic, and I found out that the entire thing was a cover up for an incest fetish. Um, so I found out that the author had been like lying to their community and was doing this as like a front um, to support their like paraphilias, and I was just so disgusted. I found out that this author was in the radical in like rad queer community, and I had no clue because it seemed like from other posts that they really didn't support that kind of thing, that they would not associate with it. But I was wrong. I was very wrong.
Were there
Yeah.
any red flags from the comics that you kind of now recognise in hindsight, now that you have all of this information and realise that they were a part of that community?
There were two main things I can think of. The one thing was like a few weeks before I found out about this, they posted like this art of their character, and they had like a sign that's like, "Do anything you want forever." And I thought that was meant to be like a anti-cringe culture thing. No, it wasn't. Um, and the other was, someone pointed this out to me, is that they had art of like the characters in the family who were like younger. They had like a picture of them like hugging, and they had like a cute little symbol next to them. And it was then pointed out that the symbol used in that art was like covertly a reference to like sexual arousal, and it was art of like toddlers. And I was just so heartbroken. I felt so angry that I'd been like deceived like this. Like it was right in front of me, and I just didn't realize. I don't think anyone did, but like, yeah, it was a lot.
So, if you don't mind me asking, what are your general thoughts on the Radqueer community as a whole?
It's like, it's like obviously like a horrendous, terrible thing, but I think there has to be some nuance with it because it's like you don't think it's like you look at it and you're like, how do people fall into this? And then you see someone fall into it. Um, I think the main people in it are people that were like traumatized teenagers that were trying to find some kind of community of like support and just fell in and got like manipulated into it by adults, and the other part of it is like actual adults with who act on their paraphilias who are just disgusting, and I hate them.
So, do you think that there is an element of people in the Radqueer community kind of taking advantage of people who may not be mentally well, or people who are young and maybe don't realise the extent of what they're actually getting into?
Absolutely. The only like people I've ever met who were genuinely like not trolling about it were teenagers or like really or like younger adults who are like very obviously unwell in one way or another. I cannot imagine like a mentally well person getting into this like seriously. Mostly it's like the community of support. I've noticed that a lot of the people, or at least like the people I've seen who fall into this, were teenagers who were like recipients of like incestual abuse or pedophilic abuse, who then join these communities because they want to find a way to cope. Like depicting their own or like recreating the situation in their own like controlled environment can like it, and it's not like a lot of people I would know would accept that. The Radqueer community seems to like encourage this sort of thing for coping rather than realizing that recreating the things that happen to them is just causing more pain for people.
Yeah, and then of course on the other side of that, you also have, like you mentioned, the people who may not be vulnerable kids, the people who are actual adults who may be into, well, there's no easy way to say it, who may like kids. So do you think that the Radqueer community is especially harmful to people who may suffer with urges that they don't like and want help with? So people who may not want a place that fully encourages it, but do you think it's kind of dangerous for a community that does encourage it to be so easily accessible?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, in one of the examples, like someone who's like a victim of like incestual abuse, like if they are like still living with their family, they're like unable to leave. It won't exactly be easy for them to get like therapy for those things. Like, and then they have to turn to some kind of like online community for that therapy, which is disastrous, more often than not. At least that's how I've seen it and how I've like perceived it through at least like this artist's actions. I watched the entire thing tumble down, and that really seems like that's what happened. It's really sad to me.
So obviously they're finding home on platforms like Tumblr and other social media platforms. Do you think that platforms need to do more to kind of combat the harmful community that is the Radqueers?
Absolutely. Like I know that it's like a thing on TikTok and Tumblr, which have a lot of allow minors on there and have a large set of minors on the site, and I haven't seen like anything done. Like other than like sometimes like taking down main obvious keywords from their site, I don't see any kind of prevention or like suppression of this kind of content. It's kind of crazy to me.
So obviously we've heard a bit about your experience now. Is there any message that you would give to someone who might be going through similar things, seeing a friend or just someone they trusted or, kept up with fall into these harmful communities?
The only thing that I can really think help people who are in this kind of community is to not encourage what they're doing and really try and get them to seek help, like medical professional help, because this isn't sustainable. This isn't going to, like, indulging in these kind of things isn't going to help them in the long run. They have to seek some kind of professional help, and strangers on the internet are not going to help them, I fear.
Do you think that general society realizes how vulnerable young people on the internet actually are to falling into communities like this? Or do you think that there's a long way to go in terms of the general public fully understanding stuff like this?
I think that there's been some progress made. Like, I know that there's been like a lot of news stories about like Roblox communities, where they're obvious like communities where people can get into. So there's some more awareness in that sense, but I don't think a lot of people realize just how bad it can get online. The kind of extremist groups like this one that are present and really take advantage of people who are vulnerable. And I think there needs to be more said about it. Definitely, we're not there yet.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just finally, if people could take one thing away from our interview today, what do you think that people should take away from your story?
I I jokingly want to say don't trust any creator ever because they're gonna turn out to be scary. But I guess it's just like uh, try and encourage these people to seek professional help because I don't watching this person like knowing that they had like a tumultuous upbringing and like these terrible things happening to them and then watching the progression into just like worse and worse and then finally culminating in like this is something that's just it's miserable to see, and I think it would have been helped if someone was able to actually help them. I know that there's definitely issues in like psychiatric care for a lot of people, and it's not really about that, but it's like it's I don't know. It's these. I just wish that this kind of thing would stop. I'm so sick of these communities being so easily able to take control over these like vulnerable people. It sickens me how the cycle continues.
I think holding the beliefs of encouraging contact with children as adults or with animals is harmful. And I can see the view of not wanting to shame people for that thing and wanting them to get help because that's that's how you fix those problems. But when you put those people in a space as well where that sort of thing is encouraged, then I feel as though they're more likely to then turn and act on it. Especially because so many young people can get into that space.
Yeah, 100%. So, what are your personal experiences with the Radqueer community?
I mean, when I was pretty young, I was 14, mistyped it in I was online and like Tumblr and Amino, Discord, all those spaces, and at the time I was in a pretty small town, like more conservative space, right? So there wasn't really a lot of queer community. So when I see a place that's like advertising to be accepting to that sort of thing, it's appealing. And so, I'm in here young now in a space where there's
blatant predators. I mean, it's not a safe environment for me by any means. But to me, it's like, oh, cool.
So during your time in those communities, did you come across a lot of people who were describing themselves as like pro-contact, minor attracted people and other stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them were very openly pro-contact, pro-paraphilias. And of course, some people were no contact, but for them to be in those spaces surrounded by people with contact is still weird to me.
A lot of the people that I've spoken to about this have kind of held the belief, the people who were against the community have kind of believed that people in the Radqueer community almost take advantage of vulnerable young people with, you know, who maybe aren't in the best mental state. Would you agree with that?
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, they're welcoming teenagers. They don't like be like, hey, you're a little young for this community, or hey, you should be separated from the people talking about these paraphilias and kinks. They're open about it to teenagers.
So what kind of other things, apart from things we've already spoken about, did you see being normalized in these spaces?
I mean, I think the thing that stuck out to me most, other than people being open about zoophilia and pedophilia, was, sorry, those are probably no words on YouTube. I guess just kind of glorifying mental illness and abusive relationship dynamics. And I couldn't care less what people do in the bedroom, but when it affects their overall dynamic outside, I mean, I'd see pairings where, like, one person was very obviously afraid when their partner would be around them. When I was in these spaces, like, seeing them be anxious and just that being normalized and no one bat an eye at that was kind of crazy to me, even at a young age. But obviously then I didn't think, oh, that's bad. I just thought, oh, that person looks uncomfortable, and that was it.
And a lot of people would also make the argument that for people who maybe suffer with like thoughts that they don't like, so like attraction to children, people who suffer with that and don't act on it and want to get help for it, there's an argument to be made that having these spaces that kind of normalize that behavior can be very dangerous. Would you agree with that?
I would, because, you know, if they make friends with someone who is pro-contact, that might encourage them to then go on to make contact.
Yeah, no, definitely. And do you think that social media platforms need to moderate this problem better?
Yeah, I mean, when you can find it so easily with just a couple tags, just a couple searches, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's incredibly disturbing, but do you also think that it's kind of a problem of parents not moderating their children enough?
I mean, I would say so, and I know obviously kids are going to be secretive no matter what, especially with topics of queerness, but it's important to moderate what your child is visiting while they're young and make sure they're not getting into any trouble, because allowing them too much freedom is how they get into these spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And so, just the Radqueer community as a whole, we've already established that you think it kind of takes advantage of vulnerable young people, but what exactly do you think it is about the community that is appealing to vulnerable young people?
I mean, from my experience, and I imagine a lot of other people's, it appeals a lot, especially when you are in an environment where queerness isn't very accepted. So when you see a community that's promoting to accept a bunch of things, or especially if you don't know what a lot of these like phrases mean, by the time you learn what they mean, you're already like in this community established. I think it's just the openness and I guess the need for acceptance that leads young people into this.
Do you think there's also an argument to be made that it's kind of dangerous to put all trans identities under the same bracket? So how they consider things, like things that could be harmless, like, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but obviously you have the more dangerous ones, like people who identify as trans groomers or trans rapists. Do you think it's dangerous to kind of put all trans identities under the same umbrella?
Incredibly. I mean, I think how a lot of people who are transphobic view trans people is like how you would see the Radqueer community, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people's perceptions on these people who identify differently than others is, oh, a lot of people find them to be pedophiles or creeps when, you know, they're just people. But when you have like people labeling themselves that way, someone who's uneducated on that isn't obviously going to paint a difference between those groups.
Yeah. No, definitely. And so, more and more people are slowly becoming aware of the Radqueer community, though, and the potential dangers of it. But do you think that society realises just how easy it is for vulnerable young people to fall into communities like the Radqueer one?
Honestly, no. I mean, especially with the abundance of communities of that sort on Discord and Tumblr and Amino back in the day. I mean, it's just so easy to get into a group like that in social media where stuff like that is normalized, or stuff like, I know on Twitter, like, harming yourself or eating disorders are spaces made available for people, and all it takes is one tag, one post you see, and you can get sucked into it.
And see, for the people who say that maybe by being against the Radqueer community, you're trying to almost censor them, what would be your argument against that?
Well, what you could argue is socially acceptable and doesn't need to be censored in real life is different than what you could argue in like a fictional scenario, for example. Not to imply like, oh, lolly's fine. Just, you know, you can write about situations without encouraging them, but in real life, when you have these happening, it's something that needs to be dealt with. And I will say it's a fair argument to say censoring it is worrisome, especially with, you know, the current state of the government. They might take advantage of that to censor queerness in general. And that's bad, but that doesn't mean we should let this space run rampant and let more kids fall into it, especially now that we're in a generation where from the get-go you're handed your iPad.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think actually needs to happen in order for us to combat this issue?
I think the main thing would be having some sort of supervision for your kids. I mean, by letting them free roam, like encourage, watching stuff together, or just like watching the sites they visit. Just even simple things like asking them, hey, what'd you do on the internet today, without making it seem like shameful, so your kids feel okay talking to you about it. And then also just restriction of actual social media. Well, I guess YouTube is one, but like, don't let your 12-year-old kid go on Discord or Amino.
Yeah, exactly. That's definitely one of the first steps. So, if you could say one thing to someone who is in the Radqueer community right now, what would it be?
I mean, I'd want them to, I guess, just acknowledge the others around them, acknowledge the space they're in, and think, is that really the place you want to be? Is this a place you find sustainable for you mentally and for others mentally?
So clearly, we now have both sides of the story presented to us. There is a section of people around the world who believes that the best way to treat paraphilias, especially those who have them but decide to go no contact, is to accept them and urge them to get help. In the cases that I saw in my short time in these Radqueer spaces, I noticed that a lot of this behaviour was encouraged. And I feel that a lot of terms under the trans harmful umbrellas especially could, you guessed it, be extremely harmful, especially if minors are also in these spaces. There is an argument to be made that a lot of these trans IDs aren't harmful, and that's fine. I can see that point of view, but I also think that things may have gone too far on the extreme end of trans IDs, such as the ones that fall under the aforementioned harm umbrella. I think the main problem is that when you're putting people in these spaces, you're putting minors in these spaces that can also host people who have an attraction to them. A lot of them spoke about how they were in large age gap relationships, most of the time with people who are over the age of 18. And that is a major problem. There are so many predators out there on the internet, and when these spaces exist with these beliefs, there is a genuine chance that the wrong people could get in these communities, no matter how well your intentions are. When I spoke to some Radqueers, they admitted that this was a genuine challenge. And although there are many safeguards with server questionnaires and such, I can't help but think it may not be enough. I think that certain aspects of the Radqueer community can be positive, but I also believe that there are far too many negatives outweighing the positives. There are far too many risks involved, especially when the people running the servers are often young and, in some cases, inexperienced. So while I don't think the community is necessarily hell on earth, I do think that it is an unsafe community for minors, and that predators can easily take advantage of it. A lot of these people are young, and we need to remember that when we debate. They might not realise it, but this rabbit hole is so easy to fall down. And it seriously concerns me how many young people I have seen stumble into it. Thank you very much for making it to the end of this video. I've worked so much in this, so I really hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share the video, do all of that good stuff, it really helps the channel. Let me know in the comments what you think of the Radqueer community and what your takes on the positives and negatives are. Remember to join my Discord server as well, it's new and you can vote on future videos, channel ideas, give your suggestions or artwork, or in general, just join the discussion. Don't forget to check me out on social media as well. I have Blue Sky and Instagram, and thank you so much to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members: Brooke, Entrepreneur, Morrigan, K4 Silver, Alex Rod, Basefinger, Carmilla, Tango Slime, Shoshka, Frozen Roses, Midnight Kitty, Willow, Sam, and Collectiki. And thank you to Moonbird as well. I had already recorded the intro by the time you became a patron, but I love you as well. I love all of you guys. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your support, guys. As always, it means the world. I'll be back soon with a new video, but if you want one right now, then YouTube thinks that you'll like the video that's on your screen.